The meals never arrived. Not for most of the people they were supposed to reach. The Viet America Society, the nonprofit organization that Orange County Supervisor Andrew Du directed more than $10 million in COVID-19 relief funds to, was supposed to be providing meals to elderly and disabled residents of Orange County, California. People who were homebound, people who had spent the pandemic alone, dependent on social services that the COVID emergency funding had been specifically appropriated to support. The meals program existed on paper. It ran at roughly 15% of its stated capacity. Of the $10 million that flowed through the Viet America Society from Orange County's COVID-19 relief contracts, approximately $1.4 million was spent on meals. The actual program, the actual purpose, the actual service to the actual elderly and disabled residents that the actual federal law that funded all of this was designed to help. The other 85%, approximately $8.6 million, went elsewhere. Some of it funded real estate purchases. Some of it funded lavish meals, not for elderly residents, but for the people involved in the arrangement. Some of it paid for luxury purchases, and some of it flowed through a series of carefully structured transfers to Andrew Hong Do, his daughter Rhiannon Do, and the contractors who had agreed to pay bribes in exchange for the contracts. $550,000 in bribes received by the supervisor himself. Another $224,000 paid directly to his daughter Rhiannon as monthly payments from the primary contractor. And then, the specific transaction that federal investigators focused on as the most concrete expression of what COVID relief money had become in this arrangement. A $35,000 home purchase in Tustin, California, funded from contractor accounts that had received the vast money, purchased in Rhiannon Du's name in July 2023. A home, paid for with money intended for elderly Californians who couldn't leave their houses. On June 9, 2025, U.S. District Judge James V. Selna sentenced Andrew Hong Do, 62, of Santa Ana, to the maximum 5 years in federal prison. The judge expressed from the bench that he was precluded from sentencing Du to additional time, specifically noting that the legal framework for the charge Du had pleaded guilty to limited his ability to impose the punishment he believed the conduct warranted. This is the story of a 10-year political career that ended in a federal courtroom because an elected official decided that COVID money for the vulnerable elderly was a personal opportunity. Let's go back to February 2015 and build the full picture. Andrew Du had been a member of the Orange County Board of Supervisors since 2015, the elected representative of the 1st District, covering cities including Cypress, Fountain Valley, Garden Grove, Huntington Beach, and Westminster. The Board of Supervisors governs Orange County's $9 billion annual budget, one of the largest county budgets in the United States. 5 supervisors, each representing a geographic district, each voting on the allocation of public funds that affect hundreds of thousands of residents. Du was, by the accounts of his community, a respected figure, a Vietnamese-American politician representing a district with a substantial Vietnamese-American population. The kind of elected official whose longevity in office, nearly a decade by the time the bribery began, reflected genuine community trust. The bribery began in 2020. COVID-19 arrived. Congress appropriated billions for pandemic relief, food security, health services, support for vulnerable populations. The money flowed to states and counties who distributed it through contracts with nonprofits and service providers. Orange County received its allocation. The Board of Supervisors voted on how to distribute it. Du voted to direct more than $10 million in COVID-19 relief contracts to the Viet America Society. VIACE was affiliated with his daughter, not run by his daughter. Rhiannon Do worked for VIACE, but the organization had its own nominal structure. The specific affiliation that prosecutors documented, the primary contractor that received VIACE payments, Company Number 1, began paying Rhiannon Do $8,000 per month from the funds it had received from VIACE. The payments began after VIACE received the COVID contracts that Du had voted for. The structure was designed to look like legitimate community services contracting. VAS was a real organization. The meals program was real. The elderly residents were real. The service was simply not being delivered at anything close to the contracted scale, and the money that wasn't being spent on meals was moving through a payment network toward the supervisor's family. $8,000 per month for Rhiannon Doe from January 2022 to February 2024, approximately 26 months. $224,000 total as the federal plea agreement calculated it. And Doe himself received more than $550,000 in direct bribe payments from company number one through channels that prosecutors documented as the financial architecture of a sustained scheme. What's your read? When an elected supervisor votes to award $10 million in COVID relief contracts to a nonprofit affiliated with his daughter, receives $550,000 in direct bribe payments, and the nonprofit delivers only 15% of its stated services, is this primarily a COVID fraud case, a bribery case, or a case of using emergency pandemic funding as a personal enrichment vehicle while vulnerable elderly people went without the meals they were supposed to receive? Type A for primarily fraud, Type B for primarily bribery, Type C for something that requires all three characterizations simultaneously. Drop it in the comments. July 2023, the Tustin home. $381,500 was transferred from contractor accounts, funds originally sourced from the VAS COVID contracts, to an escrow company. In July 2023, Rhiannon Doe used those escrow funds as part of the purchase of a $135,000 home in Tustin, California, in her name, funded substantially by money that had passed through a COVID relief nonprofit that her father had voted to fund. The mortgage application for the Tustin home contained false information. The loan documents were fabricated. The purchase was structured around money whose origins needed to be concealed. While the $10 million in COVID contracts was being distributed, redirected, and converted into contractor payments and real estate purchases, while the elderly residents of Orange County's 1st District were receiving approximately $1.4 million worth of actual meal services instead of $10 million. Doe was attending Board of Supervisors meetings. He was voting on county budgets. He was speaking at community events as the elected representative of a district that trusted him with $9 billion in annual public resources. He was also receiving monthly updates on the payment flows from company number one. He was coordinating with the contractors on the specific structure of the arrangement. He was the active participant in a scheme that, in the government's assessment, left approximately $8.6 million in federal emergency relief unspent on its intended purpose. The federal investigation, conducted by the FBI, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the FDIC Office of Inspector General, in coordination with the Orange County District Attorney's Office, had been building the case through financial record analysis, witness interviews, and the specific forensic accounting that traces money through multiple corporate entities. When Doe pleaded guilty on October 22, 2024, the specific terms of the plea included an immediate resignation from the Board of Supervisors. The county that had trusted him with $9 billion in annual budget authority received his resignation the same day he admitted that he had used part of that authority to enrich himself and his family with money intended for elderly residents who couldn't leave their homes. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the fugitive, the active federal warrant for co-conspirator Pham as of March 2026, and two other indicted co-conspirators whose cases are still developing, represents the specific dimension of this case that the supervisor's plea and sentencing didn't close. Pham, a warrant is outstanding. The investigation described as ongoing in the March 2026 Orange County DA statement. The full architecture of the contractor payment network, the specific entities, the specific individuals, the specific financial channels through which $8.6 million in COVID relief money was redirected, is not fully documented in the public record of Doe's plea alone. The guilty plea closed Doe's case. It did not close the investigation into the people who paid him. In August 2024, before Doe's October guilty plea, the government seized more than $2.4 million from VAS's in company number one's bank accounts. The seized funds represent part of the financial accounting that the plea agreement, the sentencing, and the ongoing investigation collectively address. The county has been determined to be entitled to more than $8.8 million in restitution, the amount that Orange County itself lost from the scheme. The actual victims, the elderly and disabled residents who were supposed to receive meals, received what they received, approximately 15% of what the contracts promised. You've seen the full picture. 2020 COVID contracts directed to VAS through dues votes, 10 million total, only 1.4 million spent on meals, $550K in direct bribes to do, $224K in monthly payments to Rhiannon, July 2023, $135,000 Tustin home purchase with redirected COVID funds, FBI, IRS, FDIC investigation, October 2024, guilty plea and resignation, June 2025, 5 years maximum sentenced, judge said he wished he could sentence more, 8.8 county restitution ordered, Pham warrant outstanding. What detail most defines what this corruption cost specifically? Comment below. The judge's words at sentencing. Precluded from sentencing due to additional time. A federal judge expressing in open court that the legal framework for the specific charge, one count of conspiracy to commit bribery, limited his ability to impose the punishment that he believed the conduct warranted. 60 months, the maximum, and a judge who said he wished the maximum were higher. The elderly residents of Orange County's 1st District who were supposed to receive meals under the contracts that DO voted for, they received approximately $1.4 million in services, from $10 million in COVID relief, while $8.6 million moved through contractors, payment networks, and a real estate transaction into the personal finances of the supervisor who had voted to fund the program. These investigations, FBI Los Angeles Field Office coordinating with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the Orange County District Attorney's Office, represent the specific commitment to prosecuting COVID relief fraud at the local government level, where the scale may be smaller than federal contracting fraud, but the human cost is immediately visible. The elderly person who didn't get a meal, whose pandemic experience included being promised support that was redirected to fund a supervisor's family. If this level of detail is what you come here for, a thumbs up is the best way to support this work. Was this justice? 5 years, the maximum available? From a judge who said he wished he could impose more? For a supervisor who directed $10 million in COVID relief to his daughter's associated organization and received $550,000 in bribes, while 85% of the services went undelivered? Or does the precluded language from Judge Selna identify the specific gap between what federal sentencing guidelines produce and what this specific betrayal of public trust cost the people it was supposed to help? Drop your verdict in the comments. One detail, the one from the Orange County DA's March 2026 restitution determination that most clearly defines what the scheme cost in practical terms. 15%, that is the percentage of the $10 million in COVID contracts that was actually spent on its intended purpose. Meals for the elderly and disabled, the pandemic services that homebound Orange County residents were supposed to receive. 1.4 million delivered, 8.6 million redirected. The people who didn't receive meals, they are not named in any federal filing. They are not counted in any sentencing document. The restitution is calculated as $8.8 million owed to Orange County as the contracting agency, the institutional victim of the scheme. The individual elderly residents who were supposed to be served are the unnamed background of a financial fraud case. DO is in federal prison. Pham is a fugitive. The Tustin home that his daughter purchased with COVID money is subject to forfeiture. And somewhere in Orange County, the elderly and disabled residents of the 1st District who were supposed to receive meals from those contracts are still living in the same homes, receiving whatever services the programs that replaced VAS now provide. The zagadka of this case is not the $550,000 in bribes or the $224,000 to his daughter or the $1 million home. The zagadka is the 85%, the $8.6 million. What happened to it, where it went, and whether the full accounting of those funds. In the ongoing investigation, in the cases of the two indicted co-conspirators and the fugitive Peter Pham, will ever produce a complete picture of where COVID relief money for Orange County's most vulnerable residents ended up. Due is serving 5 years. The judge wanted to give more. The 85% is still being accounted for. What stays with you? The $1 million Tustin home bought with COVID meal money? The judge who said he was precluded from giving more than 5 years? The 85% unspent on its purpose and where it actually went? Or Peter Pham, still a fugitive, with an active federal warrant and knowledge of where the money moved? Let's discuss it below. One more number, the one that frames the full human cost of 85% undelivered services. Orange County, California. The 1st District covers cities with large Vietnamese American populations. Westminster, Garden Grove, Fountain Valley, among others. Many of the elderly and disabled residents served by the Viet America Society's Meals Program were in these communities. Vietnamese American seniors, many of whom had arrived in the United States as refugees, whose language barriers and community structures made them specifically dependent on the kind of community-based services that VAS was supposed to provide. The COVID pandemic isolated these residents particularly severely. The lockdowns that made meals delivery programs essential, that made the federal funding that due directed to VAS specifically urgent, fell hardest on communities where social isolation was already a challenge, and where English language access to alternative services was limited. $1.4 million in meals for a community that needed $10 million worth. The $8.6 million that didn't become meals became payment flows, contractor profits, Rhiannon dues salary, and a home in Tustin. The specific people who would have eaten those meals, who were eating 15% of what they were entitled to, while $8.6 million moved through the scheme, are not quantified in any federal filing. Due is in federal prison. The Tustin home is subject to forfeiture. Peter Pham is a fugitive. The Orange County Board of Supervisors is entitled to $8.8 million in restitution. And somewhere in Garden Grove, or Westminster, or Fountain Valley, the elderly Vietnamese American resident who received 15% of the services that $10 million in COVID funding was supposed to provide is still there. Still in the same house, still depending on whatever services replaced the VAS program after the arrests. That resident's name is not in any court filing. Their meals per week that didn't arrive are not in any sentencing calculation. They are the unquantified human cost of a corruption scheme that a federal judge said he wished he could punish more severely, but was precluded from doing so. 5 years, the maximum, with the judge wishing it could be more. The 85% is the zagadka that no sentence resolves. Where it went, who received it, and whether the people who were supposed to eat it ever knew they were eating only 15% of what a federal program had funded for them. That is the accounting that the ongoing investigation is trying to complete. The notification bell is the only way to be there when Peter Pham is found and that accounting continues. Subscribe and stay with us.